Does everyone see a Canada goose and an alligator?
Yes.
All right. I'm ready to go then. Thank you to everyone for having me here today. I have spoken to the Villages chapter a few times, and you are some of my favorite people in the world because you work so hard to maintain a native plant presence where you live and further the idea that the future for a lot of native plants is in the human landscape, and helping to break the norms on how we view what a yard is, or how a yard should function. And what we're going to talk about today is very closely tied in with that. So I'm going to go ahead. This slideshow is usually very long, so I've condensed it as much as I can. So if I skip over some information, please ask a question at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. And it looks like my slide is hidden where I kind of introduce myself. So I will just go ahead so my name is Scott Davis. I'm a ranger at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, and have been one of the primary coordinators of a large project with the federal government that has partnered with the Florida Native Plant Society for a number of years now, where we are focused on monarch butterfly and native milkweed conservation. And that project is referred to as the Monarch Milkweed Conservation Initiative. It's a very ambitious project to research, find, discover, conserve, save, and cultivate native milkweeds here in Florida and throughout the Southeast, and work to increase milkweed numbers, and to work to make these plants available so that you can put them in your yard and in your landscape. So it's a lot of exciting material here today in this PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and get started. So monarch butterflies are declining. It's a known fact. They have been on decline for a long time, and they're in trouble. So a lot of people don't know what to do whenever a species is rare or has run out of habitat, but I cannot stress enough that this is not a red wolf. This is not a Florida panther. This is an organism that, if we all collectively work together and grow native milkweeds in our yards, we can bring the monarch back from the direction that it's currently going. So all we have to do is plant stuff. It's really that simple. So just keep in mind that this is something that you can do, boots on the ground, real deal conservation at your home. So to go ahead and introduce, give an introductory scenario to illuminate to you what's going on with monarchs and milkweeds here in the Southeast. Here is a very run-of-the-mill, typical looking roadside. And you don't really see anything unless you know what you're looking for. A lot of us that are botanists, we engage in what is known as Nascar Botany, where we've learned to be able to identify plants at a very high rate of speed, just by memorizing what the silhouette of them looks like as we drive by. So anyways, on this particular day, I saw something that I registered as important. So I pulled over, and as I got closer and closer, I realized that I had discovered a large population of Sandhill Milkweed, Asclepius humistrata, sitting there persisting on the side of the road, flowering, doing its thing. A very, very beautiful plant found across a majority of the state of Florida. And people driving by every day, not knowing they're there. So I went ahead and I investigated a little bit more into these plants and discovered that there was some activity connected with a very specific animal, and that animal is the monarch butterfly. So there were monarch caterpillars on these plants, and these are monarch caterpillars that had come from eggs that were laid by a monarch that had just returned to this region from the West, on their way back, repopulating North America after spending the winter in Mexico. So I immediately reached out to FDOT and to the county commissioners. And because the particular county where these plants were at, which in that picture was Wakulla County, was one of a growing number of counties in Florida where the commissioners have signed wildflower resolutions, we were able to put that on a reduced mow schedule. And those plants were then mowed at the right time. They weren't mowed too early. So the caterpillars were able to complete their life cycle. And the flowers were able to produce seeds to keep the population going there on the side of the road. So a big win-win. And all it takes is just knowing what you're looking at, pulling over, and making a phone call or two. So, but I think the reason why I like to use this as an introductory scenario is because roadside populations of milkweeds are very, very important here in Florida, and you will find out why a little bit later. So the reason why milkweeds are so important is because monarch butterflies are larval host obligates to milkweeds. In other words, they cannot lay their eggs on anything else other than milkweeds. So monarch butterflies both begin and end their life cycle on milkweeds. So if you don't have milkweeds, you don't have monarchs. It's as simple as that. So we have a diverse array of milkweeds here in Florida. And milkweeds are generally, we call them milkweeds because if you break the leaf on most species, it will exude a white milky substance. It's latex. And that's normally found in most milkweed species. So that's where that name comes from, if you're not familiar with milkweeds. Milkweeds are in the genus Asclepius. And Asclepius, for any of you that might remember reading about mythology in college or when you were children, or perhaps maybe you read about mythology now, Asclepius was a Greek immortal that was sort of symbolic of health and good feelings. And because milkweeds have had such a long, good history of interactions with people in the world, botanists decided that we needed to name these plants in this particular genus after Asclepius. So milkweeds are related to a number of other plants that you may or may not recognize. So milkweeds are in the oleander family. So they're closely related to oleander. They're related to species like Confederate jasmine. They're related to frangipanies. They're related to Indian hemp and a number of other species that might be familiar to you in the horticultural industry. So they're closely allied with them. However, monarchs cannot use any of those other species. They can only use milkweeds in the genus Asclepius or very close allies. So this right here will go ahead and drive home for everyone just how diverse milkweeds can be in areas and are throughout the state of Florida. So there are 21 native milkweed species here throughout the state, and they occupy every natural community type that exists. And this is just photographs of the species that are found within a 5-mile road segment of US Highway 98 here in Florida, just to drive home the sheer diversity of milkweeds and the diversity of beauty that you can find out there when you happen upon these plants. So they're very, very amazing. Milkweeds have a very unusual flower morphology. They're not typical flowers. You'll notice very quickly that you don't see any pollen or anthers or stamens per se on these flowers. They actually look like something you might see in a science fiction movie. So they have these protrusions that are called horns. And right there where the arrow points to horn nectaries, that's where nectar drips out. and attracts potential pollinators. And so a lot of insects are attracted to these flowers because of the nectar that drips from the flower. So very, very distinct claw-like morphology on milkweeds. So pollination is really complicated on milkweeds. Well, for one, if you have one milkweed in your yard and you want to produce seeds, you better get a second one because milkweeds are not self-compatible. You've got to have at least 2 milkweeds that are cross-pollinated by a pollinator in order to produce viable seeds. And then, as if that was not enough, how do they get pollinated in the first place? Because there's no pollen. So what happens is that instead of having pollen, milkweeds create what are known as Pollinia. So if you look closely at the flowers, you'll see that there are these little slits on the side of the flower. And when an insect lands on the flower, its legs get stuck on those slits. And then whenever they pull them out, these little yellow pollen sacs, known as Pollinia, become stuck on their leg. And so sometimes to the detriment of the insect. Sometimes so many Pollinia can get stuck on the insect that it's very hard for the insect to get away from the flower. And sometimes they have to let go of a leg. They have to leave the leg there. Sometimes they can't get away and they linger there indefinitely. But if they are able to break away from that flower with that Pollinia, they are so captivated by the aroma and taste of milkweed flowers that they will inevitably land on another flower. And when they do, they get stuck in a slit. And when they do, they reinsert that Pollinia into a separate flower. So there's the slit right there. So if they land on another flower on another plant and get their legs stuck, thereby reinserting that Pollinia, then pollination has occurred. And if pollination has occurred on a milkweed flower, this is what it'll look like. So here's a whole bunch of Pollinia that were on some insect's leg, and the insect landed on this milkweed flower, and its leg went into that slit right there. And when it did, it left behind a pollen sac inside of it. That pollen sac inside of it means that their pollination has probably been successful. You'll know for sure if pollination has been successful in a day or two, because when you come back to the flowers, and just for scale, this is how small the Pollinia are. They're very, very small. You'll notice that the flower heads have fallen off and that the stems, the pedicels of these flowers begin to thicken, and then they begin to recurve on themselves. So on this Sandhill milkweed, this flower has been pollinated, and you know because the stem is thickening and then it's beginning to recurve on itself and form a baby seed pod. Whereas this one back here, the flower fell off, but see how it's not getting thicker, and this is not getting bigger, and there's no recurving. So we know that this is going to fall off. So that's how you know if a seed pod is likely to develop, if you see that on the milkweed. And as they get bigger, they look like this. Botanically, they are known as follicles. And this Sandhill milkweed has produced a copious amount of follicles. And once those follicles, those seed pods are ripe, they split open. And when they split open, this is what you see often on the side of the road. You see a big tuft that looks very much like cotton. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people think that it is cotton. And it is in fact not cotton. It is the seeds of a milkweed, and those little cotton-like structures are called comas. So the comas help the milkweed seeds to blow away in the wind, because milkweed seeds are largely wind dispersed. And so, as a matter of fact, up until the 1920s and 1930s, milkweeds were grown commercially, and these comas were used as a cotton substitute for a long time. Their use fell into recess as a result of lobbying from the cotton industry itself. So, but if you see this on the side of the road, it's probably a milkweed. So the amount of time that's required for those seed pods to reach maturity, it varies between species. Some species, like the one on the left, can require 7 months in order for that seed pod to reach maturity. Whereas other species, like the yellow one on the right, require 1 month or less. And so that's very important information to keep in mind if you're wanting to know when to mow your milkweeds down for the year, wanting to know when to collect the seed pods. And so it varies greatly between species. So normally, if you don't have time to wait to collect seeds, especially if the plants are far away or in a really remote area, you can just put a hair tie or something around the follicles. And in doing that, a number of the seeds will not blow away. And then you can make a collection. For a lot of the seeds that we've collected for the project at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, this has been the only way to do it because sometimes plants are very, very far away. All right, so that's your crash course into milkweeds. So your crash course into monarchs is this. So monarch butterflies, they have a complicated evolutionary history, but if you remember 2 facts about monarchs that are the most important, you don't really need to keep up with the rest of it. So first and foremost, monarch butterflies are known as 4-footed butterflies. So if you look at your monarchs in your yard and you see that they seem to be walking around on 4 legs and not 6, don't worry. There's nothing wrong with the monarch. It's actually that it only uses 4 legs. There are in fact 6 legs, but the 2 front legs are small vestigial appendages that they don't use anymore. So that's important to make note of, because if you're trying to figure out if you're looking at a monarch or a lookalike, many of the lookalikes will actually have 6 legs that they use. The other thing to keep in mind is that monarch butterflies are a true tropical butterfly. So what I mean by that is, unlike swallowtails and sulfurs and hair streaks, which can overwinter in cold climates, monarch butterflies cannot do that. Monarch butterflies are a tropical species that cannot survive if the temperatures are below freezing. And so that is the primary reason why monarch butterflies have to leave and leave regions that get cold, because they can't survive the cold. So 4-footed and tropical. And so basic monarch butterfly anatomy, I think a lot of us are probably familiar with what they generally look like. And as you see in this photograph, this one is walking around on 4 legs, not on 6, as I mentioned earlier. And what's probably more important is how to identify the lookalikes. And so that's a monarch up top. And you'll see that the monarch butterfly, if you're looking at it from the top down, the orange has a bunch of very prominent black veins running through it. And so that's a very notable indicator of the monarch butterfly. The Viceroy, which is completely unrelated to the monarch and one of the most common butterflies in Florida, will have that transverse black line that is running through and bifurcating all of the other black lines. And so that's how you know if it's a Viceroy or not, and definitely not a monarch. Then at the bottom, queens can look very similar to monarchs, but queens will not have any notable black veins that can be seen from the top. They can only be seen from the bottom, and they are considerably smaller than monarch butterflies. So those are your 2 primary lookalikes here in Florida. But if you just look at what these species look like for a few minutes, you can usually memorize what is and what is not a monarch. So there's also a morphological difference between the sexes. So male monarch butterflies will have 2 little black spots on the back side of their wings, and those are known as androconial scales. Those scales will not be present in females. So that's one way to know if you're looking at a male monarch or a female monarch, if you're interested in looking at what your gender demographics are in your backyard. Females often, usually have much broader black veins than the males do. So the males have 2 black spots and the females have broad black veins. Those are the 2 primary ways to determine, other than looking at the abdomen, if what the gender of the butterfly is. So the life cycle for the majority of the year for non-migratory, and I stress non-migratory monarchs, is as follows. So usually if you go out on your milkweeds and look on the bottom side of the milkweed leaf, you'll find these very small, sort of cream colored eggs that are less than 1 millimeter wide. And usually within just a few days, those eggs will hatch and will undergo a dramatic increase in growth. The monarch butterfly caterpillars go through what are known as instars. So if you're ever interested in learning about butterflies, whenever they jump from a very small caterpillar up to a very large caterpillar, the different stages of growth are known as instars. And so monarchs go through 5 distinct instars of growth and development. And all 5 are in that photograph. And normally that happens in about 2 weeks. So it happens relatively quickly as they are eating through whatever milkweed material is available to them. So after about 2 weeks as a caterpillar, they go ahead and go into a chrysalis and pupate and will remain in a chrysalis for a further 2 weeks. And so generally it's about a month between hatching and when the adult monarch emerges and begins to fly around in your garden. And so if it is a non-migratory monarch butterfly, they normally live a month or less after they have emerged from a chrysalis. But that is not the case if you are dealing with migratory monarch butterflies. So migratory monarch butterflies can live 6 to 7 months instead of the 1 month or less for non-migratory butterflies. And the reason why they have to live so long is because they have to migrate and get away from cold weather. And so let's go ahead and let me show you how the migration works. So if you were to go down to Mexico City right now, down there at the bottom, you would see that monarchs are arriving right now. Monarchs that are arriving there right now will remain there until the spring. So the monarchs that are arriving in Mexico City right now will stay there until March 2021, sometimes February. So February, March 2021, those monarchs will leave and fly north to Texas. And when they arrive in Texas in March or April, their arrival coincides with milkweeds coming up for the spring. And so when they arrive there, they lay their eggs, and then those monarchs die. The eggs in Texas hatch, and those eggs turn into monarch butterflies that become generation number 1. Generation number 1 monarch butterflies will fly north and east and arrive here in Florida, usually in April or May of the year. So next April, next May, you can anticipate that monarch butterflies that you're beginning to see in your yard, at least a part of them, are potentially migrant butterflies that have arrived from Texas. And those monarchs are looking for milkweed. So when they arrive here, it coincides with when milkweeds are popping up here in Florida. The eggs that they lay here become generation number 2. Generation number 2 eggs will go on and hatch and pupate and become monarchs and head north. And then generation number 3 eggs are laid usually in late summer in the Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, parts of the Northeast. Generation number 3 monarchs will then fly north and east, and those monarchs will lay their eggs at the northern limit of milkweeds in Canada and in the Northeast. And then during that time of the year, and it's normally August, September, those monarch caterpillars are experiencing decreasing daytime and nighttime temperatures. And so what happens during the fall of the year for these monarchs, which are generation number 4, is it triggers something inside of them such that whenever they emerge as butterflies in the fall of the year, they have no interest in reproduction. They have no interest in hanging out. All that those generation 4 monarch butterflies want to do is get out of there. And so that's exactly what they do. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So right now, across the northern half of Florida, you can see monarch butterflies that are sort of funneling through here. And many of those, if not the majority of them, have come from a very long distance away. And none of those monarchs have any interest in reproduction. All they want to do is eat and fly south for the winter, and that's what they're doing. And so right now, the primary migratory routes for monarchs in Florida are rather one, they cut across North Florida, hit the Panhandle coast, and then follow it west all the way down into Mexico. Or 2, they fly south into the peninsula and rather overwinter in the northern half of the state, or if temperatures are warm, they come out of reproductive diapause, stop migrating, and will reproduce for the year. So we know that monarchs go both directions. It's been proven. We still don't really fully understand why some choose to come down into the peninsula, whereas the majority of them choose to go over to Mexico City. We don't fully understand it, but we do know that it's been happening for a very long time. So the journey north is a little different. You know, when monarchs are on their way south, they're looking for very different things than what they're looking for whenever they are on their way north. So when monarchs arrive in the spring of the year on the roadsides and in your yards in Central Florida, they're looking for milkweeds. And so that's all they're really looking for. They're looking for milkweeds and some wildflowers to feed upon. So the top priority for monarchs upon their return is to find milkweeds. So that's the big thing for them to do in the spring. The journey south requires a lot more. So the journey south, they have to find shelter and they have to find food. The most important wildflower in the fall of the year right now for migrating monarchs are salt bushes. So salt bushes are in the genus Baccharis. We have several species that are in the genus Baccharis. So salt bushes are found statewide, and that's what monarchs are looking for. Now, as far as shelter is concerned, there are several trees that are very, very important and preferred by monarchs. So red cedars in the genus Juniperus and the Florida state tree, the sable palmetto, are 2 favored tree species for monarchs to spend the night in on their way south. So saltbush for food, and then cedars and cabbage palmettos for shelter. Those are 3 very important native plant species for monarchs here in Florida in the fall of the year. So this is what a very attractive saltbush looks like. They are found on roadsides, they're found in marshes, they're found in backyards, they're found in a large variety of places. So the males and the females look different. That's a female on the left with white flowers, and then that's a male on the right, lower right, with sort of darker colored flowers. And monarch butterflies are a primary pollinator, cross-pollinator of the species. So whenever the monarchs pass through here and arrive in Mexico City, this is generally what it looks like when they get there. So they overwinter in masses on trees that are known as oyamel. Oyamel is the local colloquial name for it's a conifer. It's related to things like spruces and other softwood species. It's in the genus Abies. And so these trees are found at high elevations west of Mexico City. and they provide a very particular microclimate that sustains monarch butterflies all winter long before they decide to head back north. Let's see here. So the little monarch icons on there, those mark all of the historically known locations west of Mexico City where monarch butterflies have been known to overwinter. They don't use all of these sites anymore for a number of reasons, as we'll talk about here in a moment, but it's a very specific place. And it's not entirely understood why just yet. Monarchs decided that this is where they needed to go, but they're very reliant on it at this point. So one of the primary ways that we have used to figure out where monarch butterflies go is tagging them. And so right now, if you were to go out and tag monarch butterflies, rather there in the villages or in your backyard, wherever you live, at the coast, you'll see that a lot of people are going out and tagging monarch butterflies. And so what happens is you tag them, and then if we're lucky, someone farther down the coastline in Texas, in Mexico, will recapture that same monarch and record that data. And if they do, we're able to put that on a map, and we're able to see where these monarchs have come from and where they're going. And that has been a very reliable means of determining where monarchs are coming from and where they're going. So we go out early in the morning, and here are a bunch of monarchs that are sleeping on a cedar tree at the coast. And so what we do is we go out there with our nets, and we capture the monarch butterflies, and we put tags on them. We place those tags, and then we record the numbers on the tags, and we put those in a database online. So if we're lucky, we also capture some that already have tags on them. So for example, this is a monarch butterfly that already had a tag on it. We captured it, and we looked up the number in the database, and this monarch butterfly had been tagged 31 days earlier, 977 miles north of where this photograph was taken in southern Canada. And so the tagging works. It demonstrates objectively that these insects are flying a very long distance across continental North America. So it's quite amazing. So the reason why we're tagging monarchs, and the reason why there's so much debate and discussion about what to do about milkweed, is because monarchs have undergone a very, very rapid decline in a very short period of time. In about 20 years, monarch butterflies suffered a variably 96 to 98% decline across the United States and across their range here in the US. And so understanding what has happened and what has driven that decline, we for the most part know what's doing it, and it's a number of reasons, a number of factors. And as a result of the monarch declining so rapidly, the monarch butterfly was petitioned to be listed as a federally protected species by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service has not concluded on their determination yet as to if they're going to officially list the monarch butterfly or not. It takes a long time. They have to gather data and information, and then figure out what to do. And so we don't have a ruling yet, but hopefully we'll have a ruling soon. In the interim, the federal government, state governments, cities, municipalities, nonprofits all said, okay, well, let's not wait on this. Let's go ahead and get a jump on it and try to figure out how we can bring up numbers on monarchs now while we're waiting on this determination to be made with the federal government. And so first and foremost, we had to figure out what's driving the decline with monarch butterflies. The single biggest issue south of the border in Mexico, on the Mexico end of the migration, is illegal logging. And so Eastern Asia, holds a very large demand for the OML tree, the same tree that monarchs depend upon. And so every year the Mexican government shuts down a multitude of illegal sawmills that are in this area that sneak into these areas where monarchs are overwintering and they start to log the trees. And it's a dangerous place to be a conservationist. A number of very notable Mexican monarch butterfly advocates were killed this year. They were murdered by people associated with these timber moths. The Mexican government is being proactive. They're working hard. And as a result of that, some of the last great OML forests in Mexico are guarded by Mexican soldiers with machine guns, just to keep the illegal logging operations out of there. The issue here is that when you log an OML forest, in order for that forest to regenerate and recreate the conditions that the monarch needs, it takes hundreds of years. And the monarch butterfly doesn't have hundreds of years to wait at this point. And so we have to conserve the old growth forests that are there now. And so they're doing a good job, but it's a very perilous job. It's a very dangerous place. So, but they're working on it. The issues that are driving the decline with monarch butterflies are more complex and piecemeal on the north side of the border. So one of the biggest issues north of the border here in the United States is development. So many thousands of acres of potential milkweed habitat are lost every day for development, for housing, industry, agriculture. That is a very large, mature milkweed right there, just to the left of that for sale sign. And that plant probably has a 6 or 7 foot taproot into the ground and could be potentially 100 years old. And so when you lose these plants, it's very hard to get them back. And so, and without milkweed, you have no monarch. So development is a big part of it. So something known as OE is also creating issues. OE is a little protozoan parasitic organism that utilizes monarch butterflies as a host. And it has, the issue with this organism known as OE has been exacerbated by the prevalent use of non-native milkweeds. And so OE can kill off, can cause very high mortality rates with a lot of monarch butterflies, both when they're caterpillars and also when they are reaching the point of adulthood. So a good way to know if you have a monarch adult that is infected with OE is to look at the abdomen. If you look at the white lines running the length of the abdomen and they're sort of mottled or don't seem to be very, very clear, it's usually an indicator of OE in the monarch butterfly. There's also an issue with being underdeveloped. So OE infected monarchs often are very small compared to monarchs that don't have OE. So OE has been one of a number of factors driving the decline. Probably one of the biggest issues affecting monarch butterflies and driving their decline is connected with what's known as the Gmo transition. Prior to 1996, if you were to go to many points across the country, in the north, the northeast, and even in the south, you would find large populations of milkweeds ringing around agricultural fields. So if you look in that photograph on both the left and the right, those are monocultures of milkweeds growing adjacent to cornfields. Well, from 1996 onward, what you see now started to disappear. And the reason why it started to disappear is because Roundup Ready GMO genetically modified crops were developed. And in developing those crops, it enabled farmers to maximize what they can grow on their property. And so they were able to come in and herbicide those properties and kill all of the plants that would historically compete with their crops and maximize their crop plants. So, and as a result of that, this is what you see today. So you have just a clump here or a clump there as a result of these genetically modified crops enabling large-scale herbicide application across much of the United States. And so the transition to GMO crops and the loss of milkweed, coupled with development and loss of habitat connected with that, and a few other factors, has resulted in what has generally been determined to be 167 million acres. It's a startling number of milkweed habitat lost in 2 decades. And so if we've lost this much monarch butterfly milkweed habitat in 20 years, then it's a no-brainer why the monarch butterfly population has declined by so much. And so when the federal government looked at these numbers, they said, okay, well, what would we have to do in order to stop this from continuing? And so some of the numbers that were generated said that we would need to restore 200,000 acres of monarch butterfly habitat per year across the United States and plant 1 billion milkweeds per year in order to offset what's happening. And so that's what some of the statistics said we'd have to do. That's a very staggering number. It's a lot of hard work. So, but all the same, the government partnered with lots of other organizations and agencies and said, well, let's get going. Let's see what we can do to find what remains of milkweeds and protect them, and also grow as many as we can. And so in the southeastern United States and in Florida, the biggest question that came up was, well, where are they? Milkweeds have not historically been tracked. They haven't been surveyed. We didn't know where they were. And beyond where they're at, we didn't know how they were doing there. So a big part of the initial research here in Florida has been to figure out where those plants are at, which is what we struck out to do. And we did just that. We struck out, and through the process of trying to find these milkweeds, not only have we found them, but we have learned a lot about what's going on, generally speaking, with milkweeds here in the southeastern United States. And so here are a few really important things to take away from this presentation that we have learned from our research here in the Southeast. And so first and foremost, over 94% of the milkweed populations that have been found in Florida are on the side of the road, and the side of the road only. Whenever you step away from the roadside, the plants disappear. They're not there anymore. Even in places where the ecosystem is intact, the milkweeds are only on the side of the road. And so that kind of startled all of us, because I don't think a lot of us realized that milkweeds were roadside only across most of the state of Florida. And so was it because of development? No, that can't be, because so many of these milkweeds were on roadsides through public land, protected land. What did stand out to us was that in a lot of instances, the plants would be in where you would think to be the least likely. Here, the only milkweeds we found in this place, which was protected land, was growing right in the middle of the road. So the plants were not even found on the side of the road at this site. And so if you look at the surrounding landscape, it is an open area, it's an intact sandhill, and yet the only milkweeds that we were finding were in the middle of the road where vehicles go. And the reason why these plants are only on the side of the road or in the middle of the road sometimes is because of fire. Milkweeds need fire. They need a lot of fire. And without fire, milkweeds disappear. And so they need a lot of disturbance. And usually, as far as fire is concerned, They have to be burned every 2 years in the growing season. And so let me skip through this for the sake of time. But for example, here is a photograph of an open fire maintained landscape in 1952. Here is a cypress tree right there in the middle of that pond for reference. Now let's go ahead and flash forward to the present time. Here is that same pond in 2018. Here is that same cypress tree in 2018. And as you can see now, all of this open fire maintained landscape is gone. Because of a lack of fire, all of that open landscape that those milkweeds depended upon back then is all gone now. It's all succeeded to forest. And so what are the implications in that? Well, whenever we came out here and looked, we found milkweeds, but the milkweeds we found were in tight clusters right along the side of the road. And the reason why they were right along the side of the road and not over here anymore is because the only thing left on the landscape that's mimicking fire anymore are lawnmowers. And so lawnmowers are keeping this landscape open and maintaining the habitat that the milkweeds need for their survival. So that itself carries implications. And so if you have milkweeds that are declining because of development and because of fire suppression and are only found on the side of the road now, that is a very uncertain place for these very, very important plants to be found. And so in order to protect what are all that remain of many of these species of milkweed on these roadsides, that means that we have to go out there and actively manage the roadside with a mow management strategy. And so working with lots of local government and with FDOT to help to teach people to understand when is the right time to mow, when is the wrong time to mow, has been a very large part of this project statewide. And so, for example, here is a large population of aquatic milkweed growing wild on the side of the highway. And because this county adopted a wildflower resolution, FDOT was able to work with county commissioners and put this on a reduced mow schedule to protect these plants that are only on the side of the road and not in those woods back there behind them anymore. And so just to demonstrate how this works, because we implemented a reduced mow schedule here, there's the reduced mow line. The mower's mowed right up to that line right there. The milkweeds on the other side and that little monarch caterpillar right there were saved, were protected, and that ensures that the milkweeds can continue to persist there and the monarchs can continue to find what is the only remaining wild milkweeds in the region. And this is the dynamic. This is the status quo across a lot of the state, including many roads in and around the villages, Lake County, Sumter County, Marion County. Many of the roadsides are just like this. So it's very fascinating. So beyond that, let's see here, the computer froze. Sorry about that. Our research to try to save these plants has been complex. We've been trying to figure out how to grow them to make them available to everybody so that you can buy these plants, you can plant them in your yard. They have proven to be difficult to research because no one's ever tried before. But we have been figuring it out. Sometimes we find out that a site's going to be developed, and so we rush out there and get permits, get permissions, and sometimes if there's not enough time to collect seeds, we have to step in and remove the plants entirely. And so here we came in and dug up and removed all those plants that you saw in that previous photograph and moved them to another site where they can continue to persist. And during that period, whenever we dig them up and we remove them, we research them. So we look at what's going on underground. We figure out if we can propagate them by cutting, if we can't propagate them by cutting, and contribute to horticultural science so that these plants become readily available to all of us, because right now they're not. but they're becoming available. So a Monarch Butterfly recovery team, a milkweed recovery team came together and was organized, and we all in this photograph work actively to conserve monarch butterflies and conserve milkweeds. And so this is an active ongoing endeavor to curtail what's happening with monarch butterflies, to bring plants to your landscape, and to make sure that by the time the monarch butterfly receives a determination from the government, that we have already begun the process of increasing their numbers. So it's good stuff. So we have grown over 1 million plants at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, and we have found recipient sites all over the region, protecting plant species, growing seeds, seed saving, all sorts of stuff. We've worked with lots of public landowners to get these plants back out into the landscape and increase their numbers. So we have taken what we have learned and we have applied that to real deal conservation to get these plants back out there. So it's amazing. So I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm at the point now where I kind of just go through a picture slideshow and show what some of these native milkweeds look like that we are growing. A number of them are now available in native nurseries in Central Florida to purchase to put into your yard. So I'm just gonna start to go through these until somebody messages me and tells me that it's time for me to stop. So we're growing various milkweed vine species. So this is one of them right now. I think I have a chat actually. Let me see what my chat says here. Actually, I can't see what the chat says for some reason. Okay, I'm just going to keep going then. We're growing very. Go ahead.
I was just going to please do keep going. Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep going. So we're growing various milkweed vine species. All of the milkweed vine species are listed as rather threatened or endangered. And we are growing milkweed vine species that have come from plants right there within 20 minutes of the villages. That came from development or road widening. And then we actively look for recipient sites for some of these species down there. And so we're growing lots of milkweed vines. That's just what the milkweed vine flower looks like. That's the detail. We're growing clasping milkweed. It's a very pretty plant. It's not hard to grow. It is very hard to find, however. So we work very hard to find these plants, and then it takes us a while to develop even a flat of them sometimes. But over the last 5 years, this plant has become increasingly available with native nurseries. So this is one that you can usually find now and get incorporated into your yard. Asclepius cinerea. This is not easy to find just yet, but we're working on that. We are growing it and developing it. So hopefully you'll see this one available in the next few years. The large flower milkweed, Asclepius conivans, has been difficult to find, but we are growing this one as well. This is one that likes to grow in very wet places. Curtis's milkweed. We're growing Curtis's milkweed. This is a state-listed endangered endemic species, but it's not hard to grow. It is, however, slow to grow. But there are populations of this plant found very close to the villages in the wild. Fai's milkweed, Asclepius Fai. This is a very rare species found throughout the state, and one that a researcher with Florida Gulf Coast University has been working on, Kara Driscoll, to master it, to understand it, to figure out what's going on with it. It's a very, very fire-dependent species. We're growing some of these, but they're very difficult to find. But in the wild, we're at the point that we know how to manage them now, for the most part. Sandhill milkweed. There are large populations of this plant in and around the villages. This is by far the most important milkweed species in the southeastern United States, and up until recently was considered one of the most difficult plants to grow anywhere. We have now figured out how to do it, and so we now are able to provide to nonprofits, to nurseries, etc., viable supplies of this plant because we know how to grow it now. Asclepius incarnata, the pink swamp milkweed, it is one of the easiest to grow and one of the fastest growing milkweeds. So this, even though it grows in wetlands in Florida, it does not require wetlands if you plant it in your yard. And so you can grow this plant in your yard, in your garden, and it will grow there, and it'll flower, and it'll produce a lot of leaf material for monarch butterflies. Asclepius lanceolata, the few flower milkweed. It's found across a large area, but the populations are normally pretty small. We grow it, and it is generally available to find in the nursery trade periodically. It's very attractive. This one grows in wetlands in the wild, but doesn't seem to require that in cultivation. It'll also grow in a sufficiently moist site in your garden alongside the pink swamp milkweed. It's also a major indicator of health in the landscape, and so many rare species are associated with it, including the frosted flatwood salamander. Longleaf milkweed is found in disjunct populations across the state. However, wherever you find it, it's usually doing well there. The largest populations of it are in South Florida, in the Panhandle, and in the Green Swamp region in Central Florida. It's a very, very attractive plant that usually blooms in early to mid-spring. Michaud's milkweed it's a very pretty and yet kind of dainty milkweed that is usually only up when it's cool in the spring, and usually by June it's gone. But it is a rare species. We are growing it, and monarchs will use it. The pine woods milkweed has a very weird distribution, and it has a very odd color, very odd morphology. It's one of my favorites because it's kind of complicated in the wild what its requirements are. So, but just a generally interesting milkweed. Sclepius pedicellata, the Savannah milkweed, it has a large distribution across the state, but it is very fire dependent. And so if you don't burn or if you don't mow correctly, this is a species that disappears pretty quickly. It's not hard to grow, but it's very small, so it doesn't produce a lot of biomass for monarchs. So this is one that you probably would grow for the sake of how it looks and not what it can provide for monarch butterflies. Asclepius perennis, the aquatic milkweed. This is one of the most readily available milkweeds in the nursery trade. Virtually any native plant nursery and most nurseries in general now carry it. It's very easy to grow. You can propagate it by cutting, and it'll grow in virtually any soil. It doesn't have to grow in water, despite what the common name says. Asclepius rubra, the bog milkweed. It has a very limited distribution in Florida. Where it occurs, though, it can be in large numbers. It is difficult to grow. But once you get it established, it's really hard to kill it. It's a very attractive plant. Monarchs love it. A number of nurseries carry this plant now, so it's not impossible to find. So velvet leaf milkweed, Asclepius tomentosa, it's my favorite milkweed, and it's my favorite milkweed because it has a very odd distribution, and it's frequently the only milkweed that is up in mid-July or August in a lot of places throughout the state, including the villages. And it's also our only milkweed that is genuinely saltwater tolerant. So I think that it should be called the beach milkweed and not the velvet leaf milkweed. Asclepius tuberosa, the butterfly milkweed. It is a very readily available milkweed in the nursery trade. Native ecotype milkweed in Florida is hit or miss. Usually there'll be a big explosion of supply once or twice a year, and then there may not be any for another year or so. But generally, when that supply is available, you're able to get it because there's a lot of it. You can also purchase seeds for it through the seed cooperative here in Florida. Sclepius verticillata, the world milkweed. This is available with many native plant nurseries around the state. So it's easy to find and incorporate into your yard, and it will grow anywhere. Red ring milkweed has a kind of a limited distribution in Florida, but it's not hard to find in the nursery industry if you know where to look. It's a very attractive flower, but it usually only flowers for 2 weeks in early spring. The comet milkweed, for those of you that are from the Midwest, is very common in places like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. Very, very uncommon in Florida. So it has a very limited distribution here in Florida. But despite that, it's very easy to grow. It's a calciphile, so it likes limey conditions. So it'll grow in places that are right next to a sidewalk, the side of the road, and it won't be bothered by the high alkalinity that's leaching into the soil from the pavement. The same can be said for green antelope horn. So some of the largest remaining populations of this milkweed are in Central Florida, not very far away from the villages. And so a quick discussion on the non-native milkweed. It's very important to understand what a good position on using this milkweed is, because it's very controversial. And so, just a few things about using the tropical milkweed. So first and foremost, you can buy this milkweed virtually anywhere that you go. And you need to make sure that wherever you buy it, that there are a few things in place. One, you want to make sure that you're buying it from a place that has not sprayed neonicotinoids on it. Neonicotinoids are an insecticide. And so we now know that if insecticides that have neonicotinoids have been sprayed on milkweeds, that the milkweeds can absorb the neonicotinoids. And then when you take the plant home and use it for monarchs, monarchs will bite into the leaf material. And when they do, they're ingesting milkweed material that also has insecticide in it, and it can kill your monarchs. So you want to make sure that they have not been treated with neonicotinoids if you're going to buy it. You also want to keep in mind that it is a plant that is naturalizing around the state. It is beginning to pop up more and more and more. So here's an example of a population that has popped up in a cow pasture. And then here's another population along the roadside that is increasing in number. So this non-native milkweed is definitely has a foot in the door here in the wild in Florida. And that carries a few implications in it for monarch butterflies that you should be cognizant to. So first and foremost, when monarch butterflies are moving through here and migrating, by this point in time, most of the milkweed material in northern Florida has senesced. It's already died back for the year and won't reemerge until next year. So what happens is this non-native milkweed can provide material for migrating monarchs that is out of season for them. And that can sometimes create a situation where the monarchs will come out of migration and will begin to lay eggs on those milkweeds. And then if we have a cold snap in January, all of those caterpillars can die. And so Tropical milkweed does not die back because it is a tropical species. And so that's a concern with it. And so another concern with it is the OE that I talked about earlier. The OE, the protozoan organism that can hurt migrating monarch butterflies, it often will fester at the tops of milkweeds. And when native milkweeds die back to the ground, the OE dies back with it. But if non-native milkweeds don't die back, often the OE will remain there all winter. And whenever a monarch lands on it, the monarch is inoculated with the OE. And so what I encourage you to do if you are using this milkweed in your yard is, one, to go ahead and treat it like a native milkweed and cut it back to the ground to mimic what a native milkweed would do after Thanksgiving every year. So after Thanksgiving every year, go ahead and cut that milkweed back. And yes, I know it'll begin to grow back, but what you have done is you have removed a lot of unseasonal biomass for migrating monarchs, and you have cut back a potential vector for OE. And so basically what I'm implying here is use the non-native milkweed as a conservation tool to help monarchs while you transition into a yard that is dominated by native milkweeds, which is what monarchs really need. And so just some important takeaways to have with this. And then beyond that, this project has been a lot of work trying to figure out how to grow these plants, how to save these plants. That's a picture of a sandhill milkweed right there, just to illuminate for you how deep in the ground the root can be. And then with that, I'll go ahead and put up this. So we have a Facebook page. You can look up the Monarch Milkweed Initiative on Facebook. And if you have questions about the Monarch Milkweed Initiative, please don't hesitate to email those questions to that Gmail account right there. And then I attached some really helpful Monarch Butterfly conservation websites there at the bottom. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop and see if there are any questions. Are the questions typed, or are the questions going to be sent?
They're in the chat room.
I'm trying to pull up the chat room here. Let me see.
Okay, Scott, can you hear me? This is Julie.
Yes.
Okay, I can ask you, I can feed you the questions if you would like me to.
Sure.
Okay, I was just having a problem getting unmuted.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the first one is from Joe, and she wanted to know a little bit more about the history of the tagging, and she's commented on there's some type of documentary called The Flight of the Butterflies with Dylan Dreyer, and she says it's on demand on NBC. Do you know about that?
Familiar with it. It's very good.
Okay, yeah, she said it's about 20 minutes long.
Yes.
So I actually have a question about that. Is that only done by people that are trained how to do that, or can they train? Do they train citizen scientists, or?
If you go online to monarchwatch.org, you will see that if anyone wants to work on tagging monarch butterflies, be it a group, be it a government, be it an individual at their house. Maybe you just want to go out in the morning and do it yourself. Anyone can order the tags and do it themselves. There is a lot of information online that helps you to understand how to capture the monarchs, how to put the adhesive tag on It's very easy. And monarch butterflies are built for migration, so they're not like a number of other butterflies, lepidopterans, where you touch their wing and it injures them. By the time the monarchs have arrived here in Florida, they have already flown through storms, potentially snowstorms, even some of them, the front of them, automobiles, bird attacks. So they can handle these very simple sugar-based adhesives, and all of the information, if you go on monarchwatch.org, you can get yourself set up really fast.
Okay.
To do all of that.
That's good information.
Yes.
So also, Joe says that she plants swamp milkweed and she never gets to see a flower in full bloom because the caterpillars are really hungry and they just devour the plant.
So people ask how many milkweeds should they have in their yard? And, if there's a regional deficit of milkweed, those deficits are different depending on where you're at. What I'm getting at is sometimes someone can plant 6 plants in their backyard and they may have a sustainable amount of monarchs that use them. Whereas someone a few miles down the road or in another region can put 6 plants back there, and within 36 hours the plants are denuded. And so if you, I don't know how many plants are there with that particular milkweed, but usually if 6 tall plants is not enough to sustain the monarchs in your backyard, it just means that option 1, there is a major deficit of milkweed in your area, and all of the monarchs are coming to your yard because they just cannot find enough of it. Or someone may have a very large population of tropical milkweed in their backyard, and so they've created a very large non-migratory population that is spilling over to your yard. So the only way to get that plant to flower is to plant more plants, or you could potentially remove the caterpillars. I know a lot of people that do this. They remove the monarch caterpillars from the plants that are about to flower, and they put them on other plants that they have so that they don't eat all of the flowers. The flowers are full of energy for the caterpillars and they're easy to eat. So that's why they go to them and often will eat them first. So that's why they do that. So I would encourage many more plants to be installed there. You really can't have too many. And what a lot of people don't realize is that wild populations of milkweeds that are healthy can be anywhere from 50 plants to 500 plants. So my goal in my own yard has been to have at least 50 plants spread out. But those are goals. So, and that's only based on me looking at wild populations for years and years and seeing that these viable populations that are able to both produce flowers and viable seed and also maintain the carrying capacity of the monarchs are large. So I would just keep adding more and more milkweeds as you can. You can even you could high density plant incarnata. I have one planting of incarnata with over 100 plants, and it's 10 feet long and 5 feet wide. So it's and that is a seed production plot. So you can grow them very close together if you have to, and that'll help you to address that biomass issue.
And then Barbara wants to know, can we buy milkweed from St. Mark's?
The milkweeds from St. Mark's are used for conservation and outreach. So they go to places like state parks, national wildlife refuges. They also go to researchers. Many of them went to the University of Florida a month and a half ago for a retention pond planting project. If you are working on some sort of community garden, that would be something that's within the scope of what the plan set at the government at nursery would be able to go to. So something that's done there, maybe collectively. Maybe you use a garden at your home for outreach with your neighbors, where you get some signage. That's something that's in alignment with the mission of the project.
All right. And then Debbie asked if she has milkweed in a pot, should she cut it back after Thanksgiving?
Is it tropical milkweed?
Ooh, she did not answer that. So Debbie, if you're still here and you're listening, can you answer that question?
If it's tropical milkweed, and if the pot is outside, cut it back. And if it's indoors, or if you want to move it indoors so that you don't have to cut it back, then yeah, that's fine. What I will say is that if you don't want to cut back the milkweed, and you want to bring it indoors on the porch or in the house, you can address the OE issue, at least in part, by dousing the plant with very heavy, high pressure water. Research showed that if you just unknowingly spray the milkweed with high pressure water, that it will often kill at least a large percentage of the OE that is there, but it doesn't kill all of the OE, and it normally stresses or bruises or damages the plant. So if for whatever reason you didn't want to cut the plant, bringing it indoors and spraying it with high pressure water is an option to cutting it. But if you're going to leave the potted plant outside, just cut it.
Okay. She did say it was outside while you were answering her question, and she didn't know if it was tropical. So you're saying it might be a good idea to even cut the plant. It's not.
If the plant is outside anywhere where a female monarch could smell it, find it, and oviposit eggs on it, then I would cut it back.
All right. So Joe asked an interesting question. So we know that the monarchs sleep. Now, what about the caterpillars? Do the caterpillars just stay awake and eat 24/7? Because honestly, they go through the plants.
They go through periods of dormancy. So they'll crawl down on the stem, and depending on temperature conditions, they may be more active at night if the daytime is adverse. They may be active with extreme heat, extreme cold. Right now, you can probably go out and find monarchs that they're going to go out and feed right now, but if the temperatures dip down into the 60s or 50s, they will become inactive. They'll find a secure place on the stem or on a leaf, and they won't be very active, and they won't eat very much until conditions warm up again. So really their activity is it's not so much a function of them getting tired. It's more so they will usually be active as long as conditions are favorable to be active. So if it's moderate, if it's cloudy and overcast, it's not super hot, not super cold, they'll just eat on and off perpetually. The only time that they are full stop not active is when they're in between instar development. So if they're going from instar 1 to instar 2, they will be very stationary as they molt and grow into that next level of growth. So.
And do anoles, Steve wants to know, do anoles eat the monarch eggs and or the caterpillars?
I don't know if it's ever been observed that anoles eat the eggs. I would assume they do, because they nibble on everything. But anoles will eat monarch caterpillars for sure, and they will eat a lot of them. But they usually only eat monarch caterpillars that are in the first 2 instars. So instar 1 and instar 2, they'll eat, but anything after that, they tend to not eat. And that's probably because the caterpillar is becoming increasingly toxic because of the toxins that are in the milkweed. So, but if you have a whole brood of first instar monarchs in your yard and you come out there and they're all gone.
Yep.
It could be that an anole came out there and gobbled all of them in one morning. That's a very high probability. The other likelihood is that all of them were killed by wasps. There's an instinct that several wasp species have to come out and to just indiscriminately kill monarch caterpillars.
So actually that feeds into another question by Linda, and she was asking if monarchs have predators. Do the butterflies have predators? Like, do birds eat monarchs? Or
most birds do not consume monarchs because it makes them sick. And most mammals don't eat monarchs because it makes them sick. But insect predators are resistant to it. So milkweed assassin bugs and a whole suite of other insects do actively capture, kill, and eat monarch caterpillars. So, probably a primary predator of adult monarchs are dragonflies. Dragonflies eat a lot of monarchs.
Oh. So Susan asks, that during your presentation, you mentioned that some plants are usually available twice a year for a short time, and she's wondering what time of year is that?
Available. Some of the milkweed species that I ran through and talked about, they are up and vegetative year round. And so for example, pink swamp milkweed, it'll begin to emerge in the spring and it will have vegetation on it all the way through until now. There are other milkweed species that are very closely, they're associated with certain seasons. So Sandhill milkweed, for example, is usually only found between February and July. And then wild sandhill milkweeds or cultivated sandhill milkweeds are largely underground by the end of July, and you don't see them again until February. So the phenology, the seasonality of behavior and flowering with these plants, they're all different. And that has led to some conservation issues where, let's say that FDOT has a big stand of sandhill milkweed on the side of the road, and they ask, when should they leave it alone? Well, if you tell them that they should not mow it between February and July, you have helped the sandhill milkweed. But what often happens is if you come out there in July, you see that another milkweed that occupies high summer and fall is popping up. And what happens is often that milkweed ends up getting overmowed because it occupies a different time of the year. So as far as the species that are available in the nursery trade, world milkweed, aquatic milkweed, pink swamp milkweed, butterfly milkweed, those species are usually up and vegetative for all of the growing season. So,
okay. Marcia asked, she makes a statement. I had aphids on one of my milkweed plants and I cut it back. Could I have left it?
If you have aphids on your plant, you know, a lot of people use the soapy water method to, they spray soapy water on there to get rid of the aphids, and it works. But often it leaves a chemical residue that can make monarch butterflies sick. And for that reason, a lot of people, when they have an aphid infestation, they just go in and it's, you know, it's gross for some people, it's not gross for others, but a lot of people just kind of rub and kill all of the aphids with their fingers. And that's a very prevalent thing. With a lot of folks I work with, that's what they do. Some people get paid to walk through and rub down the aphids. Then they spray and douse to get all of the aphid remains off of the plants. And that has proven to be the best way to deal with an infestation of aphids. Cutting back the milkweed to remove the aphids I mean, you can do that, but the aphids are probably going to try to use the bottom of the plant, or that's not really going to remove the aphid burden that you have in your yard. And so if you have a huge aphid issue on your milkweed, it means a few things. One, it means that you don't have a lot of native insect predators, e.g. ladybugs that eat lots and lots of aphids. Or two, it means that, and maybe in conjunction with not having enough predator insects, the plant is weakened. The plant is ill. It may just be stressed. It might be that the plant is succumbing to the aphids because maybe it's too hot, too dry. Maybe there's a chemical imbalance in the soil. I don't personally cut back plants that have an infestation with aphids. And you can also be guaranteed that in the spring of the year and in the fall of the year, you're going to have naturally occurring infestations of aphids because in the spring of the year, the aphids build up before the predators have emerged. And then usually you have an explosion of aphids in the fall just after all of those insect predators have died off or gone dormant for the year. So it's very natural to have an infestation at the beginning or end of the year. If you have an infestation in the middle of the year, that means that rather the plant is stressed or you have a deficit of predators. In any of those contexts, I would not cut it back. I would use whatever method you feel comfortable with to remove the aphids from the plant. And then after you remove the aphids from the plant, look at the plant as a whole and say, what's wrong with the plant? Like, are there yellow spots on the plant, on the leaves? It's very easy to do a Google search on yellow spots on leaf diagram, and you will see huge whole diagrams that pop up that say, if the yellow dot is here, it means that there's not enough magnesium. If the yellow blotch is over there, it means the pH is off. And that may be why the plant is weakened and you have an aphid issue.
Oh, that's good information. So other than the tropical milkweed, are there other milkweeds that are non-native species that we should avoid? That's what Susan wants to know.
The other milkweed species that I would not say is prevalently used in the state, but you do see it here and there, is it's called giant milkweed, better known as Calotropis. It's not a real issue because it's found mostly just in gardens. It does not escape into the wild, at least it has not yet.
Okay.
That would be one that I would keep an eye on if for whatever reason you have it as an ornamental in your yard. I would just keep an eye on it, and if it's causing an issue for monarchs in the middle of winter, then you should probably hack it back because it can also harbor the OE just like the non-native milkweed does.
All right.
But other than Calotropis, giant milkweed, and the tropical milkweed, there aren't any other widely prevalent exotic milkweed species that you can see around the state.
All right. Well, we have our last question. It's from Barbara, and she says she's got orange and black bugs on her milkweed, and she believes they're damaging the milkweed.
Okay. There are many insects that are obligates to milkweeds, just like monarchs are, but they're doing way better than monarchs are in their pests. So you have milkweed bugs, you have milkweed beetles, you have milkweed assassin bugs. I would bet that what you probably have on your milkweed are black and orange milkweed bugs, and there may be several different instars. There may be adults that have wings, and there may be Fs. There may be smaller juvenile ones that have no wings, but milkweed bugs can be devastating to a milkweed. Milkweed bugs are primarily controlled by assassin bugs. And so if you don't have enough assassin bugs in your landscape to cull off the numbers of milkweed bugs that you have on your plant, they can explode year round. If you have an explosion of milkweed bugs right now, we're really at that point in the year where it's normal, because a lot of the predatory bugs are becoming inactive, or they've completed their life cycle for the year, or they're pupating, or whatever the case may be. So you may have an explosion right now because there are no predators available due to the time of the year. What I will tell you is that if you are trying to grow native milkweeds and you're trying to collect seeds from them, you're going to have to manage the milkweed bugs, because I have seen crops, thousands of plants with 99% fail rates, because milkweed bugs will come in and kill every seed pod. So they have a proboscis. So they stick that proboscis into the seed pod and drain all of the fluids and nutrients out of it before the seed pods can mature, thereby killing the seeds. So what we do is we actively go out and pick the milkweed bugs off of the plants, but we also, and what's a lot easier, is we put little mesh bags around the seed pods. And in doing so, the milkweed bugs, as long as you do it right, they can't reach through the mesh bag with their proboscis and hit the seed pod, and thereby they can't kill it. So.
Well, Scott, thank you very much. You have saved a lot of monarchs before today, but today as well. It was great information.
Yes, Scott, thank you so much. This was very informative.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming. This is wonderful. And thank everyone for coming. And we hope you enjoyed it, and join us next month. We'll have another backyard treat for your birds. This was butterflies, and next month we're going to be learning about birds. But thank you again, Scott, and thank you everyone for coming.
Have a good day.